go a little further, press you a little bit on that. Is it justice if you have an unjust law that's applied equally?
Well, the unjust law is itself the lack of justice.
Let's narrow it down to punishment injustice. If I suggested to you that justice and the concept of punishment is when someone gets what he deserves, would you agree or disagree with that?
Well, I suppose it depends on what gets what he deserves mean, but yes, I think justice requires individualized determination of the kind of crime you did, and the mitigating circumstances. Yes.
Well, let me put it another way. If is a person who commits a crime a sinner in the moral sense or a sick person?
Well, this is again probably beyond my competence. I think with justice comes mercy, and so I think we have to take into consideration all different kinds of things. I also think that the kind of crime that we're talking about is relevant to the question of what kind of person it is. So I'm not sure exactly what you're asking me. I'm not trying to be evasive. I just don't know exactly what you're asking me.
Okay. Let me shift gears here.
Yeah.
Were you chief judge when the coronavirus hit us?
Unfortunately for my successor, my term ran out just before coronavirus hit us.
Well, if you had been chief judge,
Yes.
would you have adopted a rule that said if one of our employees in the court gets coronavirus and goes to the hospital and is treated and is released and wants to come back to work at the court, it would be discriminatory to ask them to take a coronavirus test?
No.
Okay. Isn't that what happened with a lot of our nursing homes throughout the country?
I honestly don't know what happened with the nursing homes. I don't know what they were doing with respect to I'm sorry. I'm not trying to be evasive.
Sure.
I really don't know the facts here. I mean, I think in an example you gave me, there's nothing discriminatory about asking people who might be infected from a public health point of view to be sure they don't infect other people. And if a determination is made they're not infected, then of course that's the end of it. Equal treatment doesn't mean we don't take into consideration the possibilities of different degrees of health in a particular circumstance. And I honestly don't know what happened with the nursing home. I know that it was terrible that many people got COVID in the nursing homes, and it was a major vector of the spread of the infection. But I don't know why that was, except that there are people cooped up in one place, and it's easy to spread that way.
All right. I think science tells us that keeping our schools closed has a disproportionate impact on poor people and children from poor families, and on families including but not limited to children of color. At what point do you think our refusal of some of our leadership in our schools to reopen becomes a civil rights violation?
So, Senator, I completely agree with your description of the consequences of the school closing. I tutor two children in a neighborhood of Washington, D.C., where most of the students in the school are people of color, and I've been able to tutor them by Zoom every week, but they have, and they're taking classes by Zoom, and it's much more difficult, obviously, for them, although they've done terrifically, not because of me, but they have, than it would be with people with other resources.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. I don't, I think that, public officials have to weigh very serious competing concerns with respect to how to deal with COVID. There's just no doubt about it. On the one hand, we have to be very worried about sending kids back in their schooling. And on the other hand, we have to be very worried about not spreading the disease in a way that kills them, or more importantly, not more likely, their parents or their grandparents. And
Judge,
God, I don't want to be the person who makes that judgment.
I understand. I get it. Sorry to interrupt. I hate.
No, I'm sorry I interrupted you.
We just have limited time. You have written in one of your opinions. I'm gonna read. I know you haven't memorized all of your opinions. You said the Constitution, quote, does not contemplate that the District of Columbia may serve as a state for purposes of the apportionment of congressional representatives. That textual evidence is supported by historical evidence concerning the general understanding at the time of the district's creation. Is that still your considered opinion?
Yes, and I would say that is a case, one of my earliest cases, which taught me what it means to be a judge, which is to do something the opposite of what you would do if you had public policy concern. I think that citizens of the District of Columbia should be able to vote, but I didn't think that the Constitution gave me authority on my own to give it to them. And it made me sad, but it reaffirmed my role as a judge.
Okay. In my last 20 seconds, I'm going to ask you if you agree with this statement. Allowing, and I'm not suggesting the answer one way or the other, I just want to know what you believe. Allowing biological males to compete in an all-female sport deprives women of the opportunity to participate fully and fairly in sports and is fundamentally unfair to female athletes.
This is a very difficult societal question that you're asking here. I know what underlies it.
I know, but you're going to be Attorney General.
But I may not be the one who has to make policy decisions like that, but it's not that I'm adverse to it. Look, I think every human being should be treated with dignity and respect. And that's an overriding sense of my own character, but an overriding sense of what the law requires. The particular question of how Title IX applies in schools is one, and in light of the Bostock case, which I know you're very familiar with, is something that I would have to look at when I have a chance to do that. I've not had the chance to consider these kinds of issues in my career so far. But I agree that this is a difficult question.
Thank you, Judge.
For his first question as a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Senator Alex Padilla.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Judge Garland, and to your family, just thank you for your many, many years of public service, and should you be fortunate enough to be confirmed in this next chapter. I've spent a little bit more than 20 years in public service myself in different capacities, including the prior 6 years prior to my appointment to the Senate as California's Secretary of State and Chief Elections Officer. My mission in that role was to increase voter participation and ensure free and fair elections. As the country has become more diverse, not just states like California and New York, but throughout the nation, it's no coincidence that we have seen a resurgence of white supremacy and violent extremism. And history is clear. Voter suppression is rooted in white supremacy. This is true now and has been true ever since Reconstruction and the establishment of the Department of Justice, just as this committee has acknowledged at its outset. It should not be lost on any of us that after the 2013 Shelby v. Holder decision by the Supreme Court, we've seen a wave of legislation in states across the nation which have the effect of making it harder for eligible citizens to register to vote, to stay registered to vote. or to simply cast their ballot. I know Senator Leahy touched on the subject of voting rights in his questioning earlier today, but I want to acknowledge that despite the success of the 2020 election, which has been deemed secure, new voter suppression laws are being introduced right now across the country under the false pretext of preventing voter fraud. Now, we all saw how former President Trump's years of lies about voter fraud, the big lie, radicalized many of his supporters and led not just to physical threats against elections officials, elections offices, polling places, and even voters, but they ultimately led to the violent insurrection here in the nation's capital. I know you touched on this in your opening remarks, but can you expand on how you will combat the white supremacy that threatens the safety and fairness of our elections specifically?
Well, you've asked a lot of questions all in one, which is
It's complicated.
It's a complicated problem, right? So I strongly believe in voting and in increasing every possible opportunity for voting, which of course Congress can do even on its own. The Elections Clause of the Constitution permits the Congress to set time, place, and manner and to alter state regulations in that respect. In default, the state decides, but Congress can act that way. So that is one thing that Congress could do as a matter of legislation. As I said, I think I'd like to work with the Congress on improving the record with respect to Section 4 so that we can use the tool of Section 5. We do have the authority of Section 2. It does require, it changes the burden of proof, and it requires to attack one by one changes in election laws. But it does give us the opportunity to bring cases both where there was intention to discriminate, but also where there's a overall disparate impact with respect to discrimination. So we have a number of tools available to us, and the voting rights section of the Civil Rights Division was established for the purpose of pursuing those cases, and we would do so.
Okay, thank you. I want to dig a little bit deeper on this because you're absolutely right. We need, in my opinion, to restore the full strength of the Federal Voting Rights Act. There's a lot that can and should be done, not just in terms of elections administration with respect to voting rights, but the protection of voters themselves. You know, people should be able to vote free of any harassment, intimidation, obstacles, et cetera. And part of what works against that is, again, rooted in white supremacy, this big lie. We all sat through the impeachment trial, and the results notwithstanding, you can't help but be moved by the evidence presented by the House managers. Again, how President Trump's big lie about voter fraud radicalized so many of his supporters. Now, I was struck by a February 19th opinion piece in the Washington Post by Jim Sciutto about the parallels between the Capitol insurrectionists and foreign terrorist organizations that respectfully ask be inserted into the record, Mr. Chairman. In it, Jim Sciutto writes, and I'll quote, "Domestic radicalism has deep parallels to jihadist terrorism. Both movements are driven by alienation from the political system and a resulting breakdown in social norms. For some groups and individuals, this breakdown leads to violence they see as justified to achieve political ends." End quote. Now, as we all know, the definition of terrorism is the unlawful use of violence and intimidation in pursuit of political ends. President Trump's political end was clear: stopping the certification of the 2020 election at the Capitol on January 6th. One could argue that right-wing groups like the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers have acted like terrorist cells, communicating with one another, training together, and preparing for the moment they are activated for their mission. Indeed, President Trump instructed the Proud Boys on national television to stand back and stand by. And then he summoned them to the Capitol on January 6th as Congress was meeting to certify the election. What happened on January 6th was not a property crime, was not vandalism in reference to a question you were asked earlier. Judge Garland, as we sit here in the United States Capitol surrounded by National Guard troops and barbed wire, how will you bring the full resources of the Justice Department to bear on white supremacist organizations that pose an ongoing threat to not just our safety and not just the safety of this Capitol building, but to our fundamental democracy for which it stands?
I couldn't agree more that extremist groups, and particularly white supremacist groups, do pose a fundamental threat to our democracy, and they have posed that threat throughout our history. And as I recounted, that was the reason the Justice Department was originally established, to fight the first incarnation of the Ku Klux Klan. The best that I can do is, as I said, my first priority will be to have a briefing on where we are, if I'm confirmed, with the investigations, which from the outside appear quite vigorous and nationwide, and to find out what additional resources we need. But that is just a focus on what happened in the Capitol. We also have to have a focus on what is happening all over the country and on where this could spread and where this came from. And that it does require a lot of resources. I am very pleased to have read that the director of the FBI believes that this kind of extremism is the most dangerous threat to the country, and that's where he's putting FBI resources. And that is where I would put Justice Department resources. And we need very much to make sure that that's the case. I do want to be careful that we also always worry about the foreign threat, because it is always with us, and the fact that nothing has happened recently doesn't mean it could not happen tomorrow. So from whichever direction, inside, outside, right, left, doesn't matter, an attack on our institutions of democracy and of our ability to go forward with our daily lives in safety has to be stopped. And that we need it all, it's a government-wide, but also a Justice Department-wide obligation.
Thank you, Judge. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Senator. Senator Tillis would be next, but he is not in Zoom range for that possibility. And so Senator Blackburn, if she can connect with us, is next up.
Yes, sir. I am connected, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much. And Judge Garland, I want to say thank you to you for your willingness to serve and for your career in public service. And I will tell you, as I've talked to Tennesseans about this, they care a lot about law, order, timeliness at the Justice Department. And after the Christmas Day bombing, you and I discussed this, and the bombing that took place in Nashville. They really are interested in the principles and the convictions of our nation's top law enforcement official. And my hope is, and I think the expectation is, that you will assure the American people that you are going to apply the law fairly and equitably, because in this country, as we know, no one is above the law. Now, I know you've been asked about the Durham investigation, and I will tell you that this is important to Tennesseans, and making certain that that investigation is going to be completed, and that you are going to work to be certain that it is not impeded and is completed, and that you're committed to seeing this through to completion.
Well, thank you, Senator. I appreciate it, and I appreciate the opportunity we had to discuss these matters earlier as well. As I said, with respect to the Durham investigation, I don't know anything about it other than what has appeared in the media. The investigation has been discreet as appropriate with respect to expressions of its status. I understand that Mr. Durham has been permitted to remain in his position, and I know of nothing that would give me any doubt that that was the correct decision.
And I appreciate that. And likewise, we had discussed the investigation into Hunter Biden's business dealings. And we want to make certain that you commit to allowing Delaware U.S. Attorney David Weiss to complete that investigation and bring that evidence forward.
And similarly with Mr. Durham, I don't know anything about that investigation other than what I've read in the media. And again, that investigation has been proceeding discreetly and not publicly, as all investigations should. I understand that the Delaware U.S. Attorney was permitted to stay on as U.S. Attorney, and I, again, have absolutely no reason to doubt that that was the correct decision.
And let's talk a little bit about China, because we discussed some of that for the record. And our last DNI had stated that China is our greatest threat. So I would like to hear from you. Do you agree that the Chinese Communist Party is an enemy of the American people?
Well, I don't have the same familiarity with the intelligence information that the director of national intelligence has. So in terms of comparing, say, the threat from China and the threat from Russia, I'm just not competent to make that. And that comparison, and I have learned in my professional career not to make judgments on which I am not competent. But I certainly, from what the director said, there's no doubt that China is a threat with respect to hacking of our computers, hacking of our infrastructure, theft of our intellectual property. All of these are very difficult problems, and we have to defend against.
Well, we do. And I know that Lindsey Graham asked you about Section 230 and some of the issues that are there. We all are very concerned about the issues that surround China, whether it is the Chinese Communist Party and the way they threaten our democracy and our economic leadership around the globe. And we're also concerned about the Chinese military links into our American universities through things like the Confucius Institutes. And for instance, recently there was a situation at Harvard with a cancer researcher, and he was caught trying to smuggle 21 vials of biological material out of the U.S. and get it to China. And I would hope that you agree that this threat puts American intellectual property and technology at risk. And I would hope that you would assure the American people that you're going to put the full force of the Department of Justice forward to investigate and to prosecute every one of these spies that are working on U.S. soil.
Well, Senator, I'm not familiar with that circumstance, so I can't comment on it specifically, but I can assure you that the Justice Department's National Security Division was created in part for the purpose of ferreting out espionage by foreign agents, and that is also the role of the FBI, and the two working together. And if foreign agents are caught stealing American intellectual property, American trade secrets, American materials, that they will be prosecuted. Yes, of course.
Thank you. We're about a year into this pandemic, and technology has allowed for us to do work like we in the Senate are doing with WebEx. I think we've all found that it gives a lot of flexibility, but as we are spending more time online, we hear from people about holding big tech accountable. As I said, you've discussed Section 230 earlier, and we are hearing more about antitrust lawsuits. Of course, you all have the current suit against Google, and I will hope that you are going to allow that lawsuit to continue.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about a particular lawsuit, but I don't see, every matter I have to ask for a briefing on. But much of that lawsuit is public. And again, given what I've read, I don't see any reason why that investigation, the decision to institute that investigation would be changed. But I only know what I've read with respect to the descriptions of the public filings.
Let me ask you one more question, and then I'm going to have a series of questions to come to you as QFRs. The President Biden has talked about reinstating the Obama administration practice of paying settlement money from winning lawsuits to third-party interest groups like La Raza, the National Community Reinvestment Coalition, and the Urban League. And it's just, I find it really interesting that they would choose to have that money go to these outside groups instead of to victims or to the U.S. Treasury. So do you plan on reinstating that policy, and how would you justify reinstating that policy?
I don't have any plan one way or the other. I know you raised that policy when we were talking before, and I understand your concern about it. Obviously, damages recoveries should first go to help victims. I don't know very much at all about the policy, and it would be something I would have to consider if I'm confirmed. I have to hear the arguments on both sides of why the policy obviously started and also why it was rescinded.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Blackburn. Senator Ossoff, welcome to the committee. Your turn to question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Judge Garland, congratulations on your nomination. Thanks for the time that we spent by video conference discussing some of these issues. Thank you also for sharing your family's immigrant story with the committee. It mirrors my own. My great-grandparents came here fleeing anti-Semitism in 1911 and 1913 from Eastern Europe, and I'm sure that your ancestors could hardly have imagined. I'm sure that your ancestors could hardly have imagined that you'd now be sitting before this committee pending confirmation for this position. Judge, I want to ask you about equal justice. Black Americans continue to endure profiling, harassment, brutality, discrimination in policing, in prosecution, in sentencing, and in incarceration. How can you use the immense power of the Office of the Attorney General to make real America's promise of equal justice for all? And can you please be specific about the tools that you'll have at your disposal?
Yeah. So this is a substantial part of why I wanted to be the Attorney General. I'm deeply aware of the moment that the country is in. When Senator Durbin was reading the statement of Robert Kennedy, it hit me that we are in a similar moment to the moment he was in. So there are a lot of things that the department can do. One of those things has to do with the problem of mass incarceration, the over-incarceration of American citizens, and of its disproportionate effect on Black Americans and communities of color and other minorities. There are different ways in which we can try, that is, disproportion in the sense both of population, but also given the data we have on the fact that crimes are not committed by these crimes are not committed in any greater number than in others, and that similar crimes are not charged in the same way. So we have to figure out ways to deal with this. So one important way, I think, is to focus on the crimes that really matter, that attract to bring our charging and our arresting on violent crime and others that deeply affect our society, and not have such an overemphasis on marijuana possession, for example, which has disproportionately affected communities of color and then damaged them far after the original arrest because of the inability to get jobs. We have to look at our charging policies again and go back to the policy that I helped Janet Reno draft during her period, and that Eric Holder drafted while he was the Attorney General, of not feeling that we must charge every offense to the maximum, that we don't have to seek the highest possible offense with the highest possible sentence, that we should give discretion to our prosecutors to make the offense and the charge fit the crime and be proportional to the damage that it does to our society. That we should look at we should also look closely and be more sympathetic towards retrospective reductions in sentences, which the First Step Act has given us some opportunity, although not enough, to reduce sentences to a fair amount. And legislatively, we should look at equalizing, for example, what's known as the crack powder ratio, which has had an enormously disproportionate impact on communities of color, but which evidence shows is not related to the dangerousness of the two drugs. And we should do as President Biden has suggested, seek the elimination of mandatory minimum, so that we once again give authority to district judges, trial judges, to make determinations based on all of the sentencing factors that judges normally apply, and that don't take away from them the ability to do justice in individual cases. All of that will make a big difference in the things that you're talking about.
Thank you, Judge Garland. And let's discuss accountability for local agencies. The Civil Rights Division has the authority to launch pattern or practice investigations targeting systemic violations of constitutional rights or violations of federal statutes governing law enforcement. Tomorrow will be the first anniversary of the murder of Ahmaud Arbery in Glenn County, Georgia, who was shot to death in broad daylight in the street on camera. But local authorities chose to look the other way, and were it not for the activism of Georgia's NAACP, there likely would not have been any prosecution in that case. How can Congress equip DOJ's Civil Rights Division to launch more and more effective pattern or practice investigations without asking you to comment on the details of the Arbery case? And how else can the Department of Justice use its authority to ensure that where local agencies violate constitutional rights or fail to uphold the guarantee of equal protection, there's accountability?
Well, I appreciate it. You're not asking me to talk about a pending case. What I will say is that, like many, many Americans, I was shocked by what I saw in videos of Black Americans being killed over this last summer. That's, I do think, created a moment in the national life that brought attention from people who had not seen what Black Americans and other members of communities of color had known for decades. But it did bring everything to the fore and created a moment in which we have an opportunity to make dramatic changes and really bring forth equal justice under the law, which is our commitment of the Justice Department. So the Civil Rights Division is the place where we focus these operations. You're exactly right that pattern or practice investigations are the core of our ability to bring actions here. That these lead to all different kinds of remedies, sometimes consent decrees as a potential remedy. We also can criminally prosecute violations of constitutional rights. We can also provide funding for police departments to reform themselves. I do believe that officers who follow the law and the Constitution want that accountability. They want officers who do not to become accountable, because if that doesn't happen, their law enforcement agency is tainted. They lose the credibility in the community, and without the community's trust, they can't bring safety. So we have this number of tools. Whether we need additional tools in this particular area, I don't know. Obviously, the resources are necessary. I'm probably going to be like a broken record in every one of these areas for us to do our job.
And Judge Garland, with my time so
I'm sorry,
short, will you commit to working with my office and with this committee to determine what additional authorities the department may need and what resources you may require in order to be able to bring more and more effective pattern or practice investigations where appropriate?
Absolutely, Senator. I'm sorry to have gone on.
No problem. Thank you, Judge Garland. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Judge, and thank you, Senator Ossoff. And so only in the Senate would we characterize a 5-minute round of questioning as a lightning round. But that's what we're going to shift to at this moment. And those senators who wish to ask a second question will have 5 minutes to do so. And I'm going to kick it off if I can. I want to address an issue which doesn't come up very often in this type of hearing, but should, and that is the state of America's federal prisons. We talk a lot about justice under the law, sentencing, enforcement. We know the outcome in many, many cases is that a person is incarcerated for sometimes a very lengthy period of time. How long that period of time is and how that person is treated in prison should be our concern as well. It's a reflection on our values as a nation, just as many other things are. So the first thing I would say is that I made a serious mistake, along with many others, including the current president, in supporting a bill more than 25 years ago, which established a standard for sentencing crack cocaine 100 to 1 compared to powder cocaine. The net result of it was a failure of policy. It did not reduce addiction. It did not raise the price of crack cocaine. Just the opposite occurred. We ended up arresting thousands of Americans and sentencing them to lengthy sentences, primarily African Americans. And so I introduced a bill several years ago, the Fair Sentencing Act, which was signed into law by President Obama. And then I worked with Senator Grassley, Senator Lee, who's here today, as well as Senator Booker and others to pass the First Step Act. The idea was to reconcile some of the injustice in our sentencing under that earlier law. President Trump, much to our surprise, signed it into law and even spoke positively about it at the State of the Union. Unfortunately, it has not been implemented, and the provisions in there to prepare people for release from prison as well as to reduce sentences have not been effectively enforced. So point number one, I hope you will put that on your agenda because I'll be back in touch with you to ask. Second point, the United States has 5% of the population of the world and 20% of the COVID infections and deaths. It's a terrible commentary on our failure to deal with this public health crisis. But to make matters even worse, the infection rate in federal prison populations is 4 times what it is in the surrounding community. And more than 230 federal prisoners have died. We need to have a sensible and humane response to compassionate release in this time of pandemic. Senator Grassley and I have introduced legislation along those lines, and I'm going to ask you to look at that carefully as well. And the third is, last item that I'll bring up for your response, was an article written several years ago in the New Yorker magazine, and I think I may have mentioned this to you, by Dr. Atul Gawande, who is a surgeon in the Boston metropolitan area, a prolific writer and a very insightful man. And he wrote an article about the impact of solitary confinement on the human mind, and went further to talk about how people in a perilous situation can be reduced to an inhuman level just by isolation, 23 hours a day sitting in the cell by yourself. It just has that impact. And I looked into it to see what was happening at the federal level. I'm happy to report to you that things are marginally better, but only marginally. I think that isolation is cruel and unusual, and it has to be used in some circumstances for an extremely dangerous inmate, but unfortunately it's used in too many circumstances now. Many states are way ahead of the federal prison system in looking at this issue. I only have a minute left, and it's all yours to react.
Well, these are all easy because I had already thought about all of them, and in each case, I think I will be looking at each one of these problems. The First Step Act, both with respect to our, if I'm confirmed, the First Step Act with respect to the reentry education that's required so that people don't become recidivists. They're able to go into societies. The First Step Act with respect to the coverage of the act for retroactive reduction in sentences. I also, over the years, maybe like you, I've learned more and more about the crack powder distinction and how, by reading the Sentencing Commission reports, about how there seems to be little, if any, support for making that. So I now am of the view that there is no reason, so I'm very interested in reform in that area. I have read but don't know a lot about the solitary confinement issue, but I can't imagine that. Obviously, it's required in some circumstances to protect people from other people, but it's not any kind of regular measure for incarceration. So all three of these areas are ones that I was already planning to look at, and I can assure you that I will.
Thanks, Judge. I see Senator Lee is here, and I'm going to recognize him next in the lightning round.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Judge Garland, consistent with the idea of this being a lightning round, I'm going to start with some questions that can be yes or no. If they require more than that, you can say yes with this or that minor caveat, but I'd prefer a yes or a no if you can provide one of these. Do you believe that individuals who advocate for the rights of unborn human beings are rendered unfit for public office by virtue of having engaged in such advocacy?
No.
Do you believe that efforts to purge voter rolls of individuals who have either died or have left the state in question, or to require voter identification are racially discriminatory and an assault on voting rights?
This one is one I can't answer yes or no because you're asking about motivations of individuals, some of whom may have discriminatory purpose and some of whom have no discriminatory purpose.
Okay. I think that answers my question there because I guess what I'm asking is, does an individual, without knowing more than that, is there anything about those comments or support for those positions that in and of themselves would make that person a racist or an assault on voting rights?
Again, there's nothing about the comment itself, but when there's such a thing as circumstantial evidence, obviously, and if there's enormously disparate impact of things that somebody continues to propose, it's not unreasonable to draw conclusions from that. But the mere fact of the statement, no.
Do you believe that Republicans in the United States, and by Republicans I mean as a whole, are determined to, quote, leave our communities to the mercy of people and institutions driven by hate, bigotry, and fear of any threat to the status quo, close quote?
I don't make generalizations about members of political parties. I would never do that.
I appreciate that and wouldn't expect otherwise. The reason I raise these ones is that these are questions that have been drawn from comments made by Vanita Gupta, who's been nominated to be the Associate Attorney General, has advocated for each of these positions.
Well, Senator, I know Vanita Gupta now quite well. I didn't know her before, but since the nomination, I've gotten a chance to talk with her and speak with her. I have to tell you, I regard her as a person of great integrity and a person who is dedicated to the mission of the department, and particularly equal justice under law.
Understand?
So I don't know.
I'm not asking you to weigh in on her, on her as a person. Yeah. I'm just talking about the comments. Let's move on. Would an individual's past statements in the past as an adult, declaring that one racial group is superior to another, would statements like that be relevant to an evaluation of whether such a person should be put in charge of running the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division?
So, Senator, I've read in the last few days these allegations about Kristen Clark, who I also have gotten to know, who I also trust, who I believe is a person of integrity, whose views about the Civil Rights Division I have discussed with her, and they are in line with my own. I have every reason to want her. She is an experienced former blind prosecutor of hate crimes, and we need somebody like that to be running the...
I'm asking about the statement. I'm not asking about her as a person. I'm asking about the statement. In the abstract, would someone who has made that comment, would that comment itself be relevant to the question whether that person, having made that statement, should be put in charge of running the Civil Rights Division?
All I can tell you is I've had many conversations with her about her views about the Civil Rights Division, about what kind of matter she would investigate.
What about anti-Semitic comments? Would those be relevant to someone wanting to run the
You
Civil
know
Rights
my
Division?
views about anti-Semitism.
Right.
No one needs to question those.
I'm not
obviously.
questioning your views.
I know you're not, but I'm also want you to know I'm a pretty good judge of what an anti-Semite is, and I do not believe that she is an anti-Semite, and I do not believe she is discriminatory in any sense.
Okay, tell me this, Judge. You are a man of integrity, and one who honors and respects the laws. What assurances can you give us, as one who has been nominated to serve as the Attorney General of the United States, that you, if confirmed as Attorney General of the United States, what assurances can you give Americans who are Republican, who are pro-life, who are religious, people who are members of certain minority groups, in short, half or more than half of the country, telling them that the U.S. Department of Justice, if you're confirmed, will protect them if Department of Justice leaders have condoned radical positions like those that I've described.
Look, I'll say again, I don't believe that either Vanita or Kristen condone those positions, but and I have complete faith in them. But we are a leadership team, along with Lisa Monaco, that will run the department. And in the end, the final decision is mine. The buck stops with me, as Harry Truman said. And I will assure the people that you're talking about, I am a strong believer in religious liberty, and there will not be any discrimination under my watch.
Thank you.
I might remind the committee that the statements are being alleged can all be asked of the actual witness. The committee is going to have a hearing on these individuals, and it would only be fair to take the question to them as opposed to asking for a reaction from someone who did not make that statement. Senator Klobuchar?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciated, Judge, your full-throated defense not only of religious liberty, which I know is important to Senator Lee, but also of your team and the people that you want to work with going forward. And while the chairman is correct, we can ask questions of those nominees. I think it's important to hear from you with their hearings coming up of your beliefs about how they can do the job. So I appreciate that. I know both of them and have a lot of respect for them.
Thank you, Senator. They have skills that I do not have. They have experiences that I do not have. Likewise, Lisa Monaco has experiences in the intelligence world that I do not have. No human being can have all of the skills necessary to run the Justice Department, and I need this leadership team if I'm going to be successful, if you confirm me.
Very good. Well, thank you very much. And one thing that we didn't touch on when I asked my first round of questions was the Violence Against Women Act, and I'm going to be working with Senator Feinstein and others on this committee to finally get that done. I don't know if you followed this, but we've had a delay in getting that reauthorized. It's tended to be a bipartisan bill in the past, and I have several provisions in the bill, including one on to fix a loophole that exists involving, it's called the boyfriend loophole, but it's not as positive as that sounds, about getting guns after people have committed serious crimes. But the second piece is a bill called the Abbey Honold Act, which is a rape victim in Minnesota who worked with us, and Senator Cornyn is my co-sponsor of the bill, to be able to do a better job with law enforcement to investigate sexual assault crimes. But just in general, do you want to talk about your views on the Violence Against Women Act and the Justice Department role in training and the like across the country?
Yeah, so as I know you know, the Violence Against Women Act was pressed by Senator Joe Biden many years ago, and he has a deep commitment to its continued reauthorization, as do I. I was in the Justice Department when we set up the first office for violence against women for the purpose of coordinating departmental programs in this area. I know this requires resources. Both of the examples that you give, again, I don't know the specifics, but from the description, I can hardly imagine a serious disagreement. We have to provide the resources necessary to help rape victims, obviously, and I don't see any reason why somebody who commits a violent crime against a person but isn't married or have an intimate relationship should be treated any differently than one who does. So I think I'm all in on the violence against women re-upping the statute.
Very good.
Authorization, I guess.
Thank you. Another thing that I've been very focused on, in part because my dad struggled with alcoholism most of his life and has got through that thanks to treatment and recovery, is to give that same kind of opportunity to people in the criminal justice system. And drug courts are a big presence in Minnesota, as is treatment. We're home of Hazleton Betty Ford, as well as many other fine treatment centers. And we've worked really hard here. I've led some of the efforts on diversion with federal courts, with drug court, and of course there's much use of them on the state courts. Could you talk about your views on that?
Yeah, no, I think drug courts and diversion are an excellent idea for people who have addiction and need to be treated. I think now that the opioid crisis has struck large parts of America, many Americans now understand that sometimes it is just not a question of willpower to turn this stuff down, that this is these kind of drugs take control of your lives and you just can't do anything about it. And treating people in those circumstances in the criminal justice system is abuse of them, but also it's a terrible misallocation of resources. So the drug courts that are able to get people into addiction programs are godsend, and I'm in favor of them.
And thank you for also mentioning opioids, which has been such a scourge. We lost Prince in Minnesota because of opioids, but we lost a lot of other people that people may not know their names, and a lot of kids to opioids. And actually, Senator Whitehouse and I, along with Senator Portman, Senator Graham's been involved in this, and many others, Grassley, have been leading the way for a while before people were even identifying this as an issue. And commitment to the treatment side of it, which you've already made just now, but also to the prosecution of synthetic production and distribution, synthetic opioids, continues to this day. Could you comment briefly? I think maybe Senator Graham asked you about this, but if you could comment.
Yeah, he did, and of course I think that's right. The people who are putting the poison into the communities are the ones we should be focusing on, I think that's what the DEA is well known for doing, and I'd like to put as much effort into this as we possibly can.
Okay, I see the chairman is looking at me in a very polite Midwestern way to tell me that my time has expired, so thank you.
I'm familiar with the polite Midwestern way.
Senator Kennedy, your diligence has been rewarded. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Judge, I'm really curious about your thinking on this. And I don't want my questions to be interpreted as suggestive or inconsistent with your thinking. But you and I are about the same age, I think.
I think so. That's right, Senator.
What is, when you refer to systemic racism, what is that?
I think it is plain to me that there is discrimination and widespread disparate treatment of communities of color and other ethnic minorities in this country. They have a disproportionately lower employment, disproportionately lower homeownership rates, disproportionately lower ability to accumulate wealth.
Can I stop you? Because this 5 minutes goes so fast.
I'm sorry.
So you're basically saying there's a disparate impact.
There's disparate impact, which in some cases is the consequence of historical patterns. Sometimes is the consequence
Okay,
of
let me ask you this.
unconscious bias and some kind conscious.
When you were at the Department of Justice,
Yes.
was the Department of Justice then systemically racist?
I think we look for a pattern or practice in each institution. When you talk about a specific institution, you look for its pattern and practices.
But how do you know what you know? In other words, you say an institution is systemically racist.
I didn't say any particular institution.
I know. I'm not saying you did.
Yeah.
I'm saying if you say an institution is systemically racist, how do you know what you know? Do you measure it by disparate impact, controlling you for other factors?
Well, the very
Or do
specific.
you just look at the numbers and say the system must be racist?
Well, now you've asked me a slightly different question, which I think I have a slightly different answer for.
Okay,
So
cool.
the authority the Justice Department has to investigate institutions is to look for patterns or practices of unconstitutional conduct. And if we find a pattern or a practice of unconstitutional conduct, I would describe that as institutional racism within that institution. That may not be the perfect definition, but that's what I would think.
So it's just a product of the numbers.
Well, if there is a pattern and a practice, this is not just a question of individual numbers. What we're looking for here under those investigations are patterns. Why is it that, a series of similar events are occurring like that? Looking into any individual's heart is not something we can do.
Who bears the burden of proving that? The institution? Or
No,
the justice?
no. Like as in all matters of law, the burden is on the investigator to prove, first by investigation, then before a court.
Is there any other way to measure institutional racism other than the numbers, the disparate impact?
Well, yes. I mean, you can look at large numbers of individual cases in which discriminatory conduct is actually found, intentional discriminatory conduct. Then it's not just a question of numbers. But, if an institution has a very large number of incidents of unconstitutional conduct, the entity is responsible in the same way a corporation is responsible for the behavior of its individuals. It's the same way.
What's the difference, though, between people who are racist and an institution that's racist?
Now we do have a cosmic question, but I think institutions are made up of.
Yeah, but this is important.
I know. I'm totally with you. I totally agree with that. Corporations are nothing other than the collection of their individuals. And the same is true for a public entity, which is in a certain way a corporation.
Okay, I got to get one more in. I'm sorry, I got 24 seconds.
I'm sorry, you asked a very hard question.
Well, we can talk about this later, but I want to ask you about this concept of implicit bias.
Yeah.
Does that mean I'm a racist no matter what I do or what I think? I'm a racist, but I don't know I'm a racist?
Okay, the label racist is not one that I would apply like that. Implicit bias just means that every human being has biases. That's part of what it means to be a human being. And the point of examining our implicit biases is to bring our conscious mind up to our unconscious mind and to know when we're behaving in a stereotyped way. Everybody has stereotypes. It's not possible to go through life without working through stereotypes. And implicit biases are the ones that we don't recognize our behavior. That doesn't make you racist, no.
Who judges that? Doesn't the person judging me have his own implicit bias? How do I know his implicit bias isn't worse than my implicit bias?
I agree, but I'm not judging you, Senator, and I don't know
I'm not asking
who
you
would
to,
be judging.
but somebody, if you say you have implicit bias, that's a pejorative statement. I'm not saying you're being mean. You're not a mean guy. That's obvious. You're a nice guy. If you say somebody has implicit bias, somebody's got to make that subjective judgment, and the person making that subjective judgment has implicit bias. If it's part of being a human, then how do you know who wins?
Fair enough, but if we say that all people have implicit bias, it's not, you shouldn't take it as pejorative. This is just an element of the human condition. So you shouldn't take that as pejorative. Implicit bias is just a descriptor of the way everyone's mind works.
How about if you say that America has racists in it, just like everybody else? Does that just like everywhere else? Does that make America systemically racist?
I think I don't want to waste your time because I think this is what I said before. What I mean by systemic racism is the patterns of discrimination and disparate treatment across the country. It doesn't mean that any particular individual is a racist.
Judge, I'm in big trouble. I've gone way over.
I'm developing a bias. Thank you for the exchange.
It's a pleasure talking with you, Senator.
Same here, Judge.
Appreciate
You'll be a
it.
good Attorney General.
All right, so I'd like to let the committee know that Senator Hirono will be the next up, and then we're going to take a break and return to 5-minute rounds. Senator Hirono, are you tuned in?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to ask what I think is a very straightforward question. Over the past couple of years, the Justice Department has initiated a number of efforts related to missing and murdered Indigenous people and women, including U.S. Attorney-led pilot projects in Alaska and Oklahoma to implement tailored tribal community response plans. To what extent do you plan to continue to focus on these and other regional engagement efforts that could help address the missing and murdered Indigenous people crisis?
Well, I certainly do intend to continue those. Again, last time I was in the Justice Department, the Office of Tribal Justice was established, and I believe from looking at the org chart that it's still there. This is an important aspect. We have a responsibility to Indigenous peoples, both statutory and otherwise, to protect. And many of our problems in this country are regional, and we must focus our resources on problems that are regional. Not every problem is a national one, and regional problems have to be addressed directly with respect to the problems caused in those regions. And
Thank you, Judge Garland, because I think this is an possibly underreported, and definitely we don't pay enough attention to what is happening to murdered and missing and Indigenous women. So I think we need to put a lot more emphasis on what's going on there. Now, the past 4 years have seen a reawakening of right-wing extremism. Last year, FBI Director Wray testified that the greatest domestic terrorist threat facing the United States is white extremist groups. And of course, last month we had an insurrection at the U.S. Capitol led by white supremacists and right-wing extremists. Late last month, the New York Times reported that President Trump, with the help of his Attorney General Barr, diverted law enforcement resources from combating the serious threat posed by right-wing extremist groups. Will you reprioritize Justice Department resources to address white supremacists and other right-wing extremists?
Yes, Senator, if anything was necessary to refocus our attention on white supremacists, That was the attack on the Capitol, and I expect to put all departmental resources necessary to combat this problem into this area, to make sure both our agents and our prosecutors have the numbers and the resources to accomplish that mission.
Thank you. My next question has to do with the immigration courts. And we discussed immigration and the courts when we were able to meet a few weeks ago. And it's worth highlighting that under the Trump administration, the backlog of cases pending in the immigration courts has exploded to almost 1.3 million cases. That is an amazing number. In some jurisdictions, the wait to hear a case is 4 years, and there are cases that have been pending for more than 5 years. And this not only affects families trying to reunite, but students trying to study or train in the U.S., victims of crime who are working with law enforcement, and members of our military trying to adjust status. 1.3 million backlog. How will you address this backlog and increase the efficiency of the immigration courts?
This is an extraordinarily serious problem. Looking from my pampered perch as an appellate judge who has a limited number of cases and weeks to study those and then weeks and weeks to write those, I can't imagine how judges can operate under the conditions that you describe and that I have heard even from other judges exist. When I get into the department, if I'm confirmed, I will certainly look into what can be done about this. I suppose this must mean an increase in the number of resources and judges. It must mean some ability to give to the judges to prioritize their cases. Even in our own appellate courts, we have developed ways in which we handle some cases more swiftly, and some cases take longer. Some cases are summarily resolved. Some require full opinions. Some way of evaluating this is required, but I can't give you any specific idea with respect to court administration, which I know something about, but not an enormous about, until I have a chance to get into the department if confirmed and to understand what the cause of this huge backlog and number of cases is.
There is an executive office for immigration review that oversees these, but I think the really important thing is an acknowledgement that this kind of serious backlog has got to be addressed, and because lives are at stake here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Rono. We're going to break now and come back at 5 minutes after 3. Committee resumes, and I'm going to turn to the ranking member, Senator Grassley. 5 minutes. Go.
Thank you. Judge Garland, when I talked to you on the phone, I said I was going to give you a binder. I'm not going to ask you to come up and give it, and I'm not going to take it down to you, but I'll have my staff give it to you, of letters going back to the last 2 years of the Trump administration that haven't been answered by the department, and also maybe just a very few letters of the recent administration. So I hope that you will do what you can to get those answers. So 6 months from now, I don't blame you. It's the fact that the Trump people didn't answer it.
I would like to keep the blame on my predecessor.
Okay.
Yes, Senator.
Thank you. And then I'm going to say something about your answering questions for us. And this goes back now that I'm ranking member. I want to give you a quote that I said to Senator Sessions when he was sitting where you are. And if Senator Feinstein contacts you, do not use this excuse, as so many people use, that if you are not a chairman of a committee, you do not have to answer the questions. I want her questions answered just like you would answer mine. So I hope that whether I'm ranking member or chairman of the committee, you will help me get answers to the questions, and I hope Senator Durbin will do the same thing.
I will not use any excuse to not answer your questions,
Thank
Senator.
you. And then the other thing is I don't want to dwell on Durham, but several people have asked you, and you've given the same answer, and I understand why you give that answer, but would it be impossible for you to have some sort of a briefing on Durham between now and the time you get our written answers back so you could give us a more definitive answer?
So I don't think it's appropriate. I mean, I assume, among other things, that the Durham investigation.
I'll accept your answer.
Okay.
You don't need to go any further.
Yeah.
Okay. Then let's go to a subject of domestic terrorism. And that, obviously, in a democracy, we need to be able to disagree with each other without violence. Political extremism, the willingness to use violence to advocate one's political views on either side, is a threat to our democracy. The Capitol attack shows us that very directly. I think you've answered this question, and so just a very short answer. I think you've assured all of us that the Justice Department has all the necessary resources to investigate and prosecute all cases connected to the attack on the United States Capitol.
I can't yet say we have all the resources. What I said was I would look into the question of whether I just don't know.
Okay.
But we certainly have authorities to look into it. Whether we have the money and the person power, I just don't know yet.
Okay. Then likewise, in the previous year, there have been numerous attacks, not only on other institutions of the government like the White House and the federal courthouse in Portland, but on hundreds, if not thousands, of police officers who were injured, as well as on fellow citizens and their businesses, particularly small businesses. The Justice Department opened over 300 domestic terrorism cases due to that violence and started an anti-government extremism task force. So I hope you could commit, absolutely as you did for the Capitol rioters, that you will see those investigations of the 2020 riots and continuing Antifa riots in the Pacific Northwest through to the very end.
The Justice Department, I think Director Wray said it exactly right, which is we investigate violence. We don't care about ideology.
Okay.
If there are investigations going on like those, then of course they're going to continue.
Okay. And then taking off a little bit what you referred to what the FBI said, former Attorney General Barr noted that the FBI, while it had robust programs for white supremacism and militia extremism, lacked a similar infrastructure for anarchist extremism cases. Former acting Department of Homeland Security Secretary Wolf stated that this may have contributed to law enforcement being blindsided by the civil unrest that began in 2020. So I hope that I can get you to say that you'd be willing to review your anarchist extremism program for weaknesses and fixing those weaknesses based upon what Barr said, that the FBI said that they had better programs to go after white supremacy than they did other anarchist extremism.
I think we need to go after violence from whatever direction, left, right, up, down. It doesn't make any difference. We need to go after that. I think what Director Wray had said was what he was most concerned about was the rise of white supremacist extremism as an element of domestic terrorism. But it doesn't matter what direction it comes from. It doesn't matter what the ideology is. We have to investigate it.
I guess my time's up. I'm going to have a lot of questions for answer in writing.
Fair enough.
So I want to try to give an indication of the sequence. Dick Blumenthal is going to be next, and then on the Republican side, I think it's going to be John Cornyn. Then it'll either be Senator Ossoff or Senator Booker. They can arm wrestle until I have to make that decision. And then Senator Cotton, I believe you were the next arrival. This has become kind of a little difficult to predict the sequence. I want to make sure you see it coming.
I would never want a rookie senator to go between Cotton and Cornyn, so I'll go there.
Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I want to pursue a couple of the questions that I was asking when we ran out of time. Just to say that on the issue of climate change, President Biden, as a candidate, committed to hold accountable the oil and gas industry for any lies or fraud they had committed in denying the effects of climate change. And I hope you'll take that into consideration in determining what the Department of Justice will do in those kinds of cases, pursuing any kind of pollution or climate change or lies in connection with the oil and gas industry. And just to kind of ask a threshold question, do you have any doubt that human beings are a cause of climate change?
No doubt at all.
Thank you. You may
That wasn't a trick question, I guess.
It wasn't a trick question. Okay. I ask it because the last major nominee before this committee, back in September, it was a Supreme Court nomination, seemed to have some trouble with that question, but I'm glad you don't. Let me move to the issue of racial discrimination, which has been pursued, and I really welcome your very sincere and passionate commitment to ending racism and racial injustice. We're in the midst of a racial justice movement right now. One of the areas that most concerns me is holding accountable public officials when they violate individual rights and liberties. As you know, Section 242 makes it a federal crime to willfully deprive a person of their constitutional rights while acting under color of law, but prosecutors have to show that that public official had a specific intent to deprive constitutional rights, which, as you also know, is a pretty high bar. I believe, and I have advocated, that we, in effect, lower the state of mind requirement in Section 242 from willfully to knowingly or with reckless disregard, because this stringent mens rea requirement makes Section 242 prosecutions rare or impossible. And so I hope you agree that we need to adopt measures that will enable criminal accountability where all of the elements of the crime are committed and the mens rea intent requirement can, in effect, fit the crime.
Well, what I can agree is that I'll consult with the career lawyers in the Civil Rights Division, who are the ones who would be bringing these cases and who have brought them in the past. I honestly just don't know. I know everyone says that they're very difficult to make. On the other hand, in the Clinton administration, we did successfully make quite a number of those cases. So I'd like to know from talking to them what kinds of changes might be necessary in the statute and what the consequences of changing the mens rea requirement would be.
Thank you. I'd also like to ask you about Section 230. I've proposed various measures, one of them actually adopted in law and signed by the president, that imposes accountability on the big tech platforms for certain kinds of really horrific material, human trafficking, under SESTA, and Senator Graham and I have led an effort, it's called the Earn It Act, to hold accountable the tech companies for spreading child sexual abuse material. I think reform of Section 230 is long overdue. I led these kinds of targeted and indeed bipartisan efforts to revise Section 230 to hold big tech accountable, and I hope that you will consider joining with the Congress in those kinds of targeted, deliberate efforts to reform Section 230, which no longer fits the world that currently it applies to.
So I don't know that much about 230 except for the case I mentioned that I worked on myself, which was a pretty direct application of the provision. I know that a number of members, including you, spoke to me about this in our meetings, and I know people have different views about how it should be altered. I really would have to study that, but I'm very eager to study that. There's no doubt the internet has changed from when 230 was originally adopted. So I would be eager and interested in studying it and speaking with the members about it.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Senator Blumenthal. Senator Cornyn.
Judge, are you familiar with Title 42, which is a public health measure which restricts traffic across the international border as a public health measure to mitigate the spread of COVID-19? Are you familiar with that?
I don't know the statute specifically. I know that there must be provisions that do that, but I don't know the statute, no.
Well, one of the things I hear from the Border Patrol and Customs and Border Protection is they're fearful that when the current Title 42 restrictions on cross-border traffic are lifted, there will be no plan in its place and certainly no transition to get back to normal cross-border trade, traffic, and visit. And this is a huge issue that I've raised with Director Mayorkas and others as well, and I just want to make sure that's on your radar screen. But I also want to take up what Senator Hirono was talking about, the 1.3 million asylum cases that are backlogged. There's no way that the United States government is ever going to clear that backlog. But I'd want to suggest to you that that is part of a conscious strategy by the cartels who make a lot of money moving people across the border into the United States along with drugs, whether it's human trafficking, whether it's, as I say, drugs, whether it's just migrants who are trying to flee poor economic circumstances and dangerous conditions in their home country. But if the Biden administration is not going to enforce current laws with regard to immigration, and there are many people suggesting, including the nominee for Health and Human Services, that we ought to give free health care to people who are not legally in the country. All of this is going to be a huge incentive for more and more people to immigrate illegally into the United States. And obviously the Department of Justice has a very important role to play there. But I want to suggest this is not an accident. This is not a coincidence. This is part of a conscious strategy by the cartels who are enriched by each and every person, each and every load of drugs that comes across the border. And I hope that you will commit to working with me and all the other members of Congress to try to address this humanitarian and public health crisis in addition to the other aspects of immigration. Will you agree to do that?
Certainly, I will commit to working with members of Congress to address the public health crisis. I have to say, I wasn't aware that the cartels were doing this, but this seems like something that the Justice Department needs to focus on.
Well, at different times, it's referred to as transnational criminal organizations, cartels. Basically, it's for people who are engaged in criminal enterprises for money. That's why they do it. They care nothing about the people that they leave, some to die en route to the United States. All they care about is money. So I appreciate your willingness to work with me and others about that. China and Russia, to a lesser extent, have perfected cyber espionage on the United States for many reasons, but in part to steal our intellectual property. The billions of dollars that Congress appropriates for development of the next generation stealth fighter to nuclear modernization, you name it. If the Russians and the Chinese can get it without making those investments, then the years-long delay necessary to roll them out, they have a tremendous advantage in terms of competing with us economically and also militarily. 80% of all economic espionage cases brought by the Department of Justice involve the communist China, and there are at least some nexus to China in about 60% of all trade theft cases. I've told people that Director Wray, who's a pretty stoic individual, gets positively animated when he begins to talk about the role that China is playing and its rivalry with the United States, both from an economic standpoint, and if you look at the South China Sea and some of its aggressive and boisterous actions there, with the potential for military conflict at some future. This is our number one challenge, I believe, today as we speak here. Do you share my concerns about China's role as a rival in the world, what they're doing in terms of stealing intellectual property, what that means to us economically and from a national security perspective?
Well, Senator, I don't have any inside information with respect to what the intelligence agencies know, but I've read quite a lot about this, and it seems quite clear to me that the Chinese are involved in hacking and stealing our intellectual property. We're in an age where individual espionage prosecutions don't quite cut it, given the internet and how so much can be stolen in just a single hack. So this has to be an all-of-government response to this problem. There has to be a forward look as to what's happening to us. There has to be a defensive look. I know that that's the purpose of Cyber Command. That's certainly something that the DNI is very concerned about, and then, of course, the FBI with respect to enforcement. But this is a dangerous problem for all the reasons you said, and it requires a whole-of-government response.
Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Cornyn. Based on who is present and apparently interested, it'll be Senator Booker, Senator Cotton, Senator Ossoff, Senator Hawley. Those are the ones I see. So, Senator Booker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for the grace of Senator Ossoff for allowing me to go before him. I'd love to just jump in real quick, if I may, and a lot has been talk about your incredible work with the Oklahoma City bombing, but I'm also aware that you have a long record of working on domestic terrorism in pretty significant ways. In the mid-1990s, in a response to a wave of bombings and arson attacks against black churches in the South and other houses of worship, the Clinton administration formed a national task force where you and your leadership, along with others, helped to make this Justice Department priority, resulting in several hundred investigations and arrests. And I just really appreciate the totality of your record on fighting domestic terrorism. I do just really quickly just wonder, just in terms of proportionality, since that time till now, we've seen just this rise of right-wing terrorist attacks in our country. In fact, since 9/11, the majority of domestic terrorist attacks have been right-wing extremist groups. The majority of those have been white supremacist groups. And I'm just hoping, and again, you're not in the position, God willing, you will be, but just the proportionality of the resources we are directing towards trying to stop the scourge of domestic terrorism Is this something that you will look at in terms of the degree of the resources of the agency?
Yeah, as I say, I think the first thing I should do as part of my briefings on the Capitol bombing are briefings with Director Wray as to where he sees the biggest threat and whether the resources of the Bureau and of the Department are allocated towards the biggest threat and the most dangerous and direct threat. We do have to be careful across the board. We can never, let somebody sneak around the end because we're not focusing, but we also have to allocate our resources towards the biggest threat.
Great. And I'd like to shift back to marijuana. Our earlier conversation, we were talking about the systemic racism there that I've watched tons of friends in elite colleges not worrying at all about being arrested for marijuana, while the inner city Black American community I live into, it's a much different much different set of laws applying to them. But I actually want to get to the good news, I think, in the United States of America is that red states, blue states, America general, if you want to call those states that way, or American states are moving towards more and more legalization, medical marijuana, loosening up of laws, decriminalization. It's an amazing thing, but the federal government is out of step with that, right, as of now, and I hope to work in a bipartisan way to see if we can advance the federal government, maybe to delist the legislation, think of some restorative justice elements. Just today, New Jersey signed its first major effort at legalization and restorative justice. But one thing that was done by the Obama administration was putting forward the Cole Memorandum, as I'm sure you're aware, but Attorney General Jeff Sessions rescinded the Cole Memorandum, which gave guidance to U.S. attorneys that the federal marijuana prohibition should not be enforced in states that have legalized marijuana in some form. And so do you think that the guidance in the Cole Memorandum to deprioritize marijuana enforcement should be reinstated? That is, should the Justice Department respect states' decisions on marijuana policy?
So I don't have every element of the Cole Memorandum in mind, but I do remember it, and I have read it. This is a question of the prioritization of our resources and prosecutorial discretion. It does not seem to me a useful use of limited resources that we have to be pursuing prosecutions in states that have legalized and that are regulating the use of marijuana, either medically or otherwise. I don't think that's a useful use. I do think we need to be sure that there are no end runs around the state laws that criminal enterprises are doing. So that kind of enforcement should be continued. But I don't think it's a good use of our resources where states have already authorized it, and it only confuses people, obviously, within the state.
So really quickly, the violence against Black trans Americans is unconscionable, with many murders every single year. The bullying and violence against a lot of trans children. About a third of LGBTQ American children report missing school because of fear of violence and intimidation. Is this something that you will make a priority to protect all children from violence and discrimination, particularly in this case, transgender children? And would you also commit to taking seriously the targeting of transgender adults, specifically with the trend we're seeing with the alarming numbers of murders of black transgender women?
These are hate crimes, and it's the job of the Justice Department to stop this, to find them, to enforce, and to penalize. And that's what the section of the Special Litigation Unit in the Civil Rights Division is intended to do. There is the Shepherd-Byrd Act, which was particularly aimed at this, and I think it's. I'm not sure whether it needs broadening, but it's clear to me that this kind of hateful activity has to stop. And yes, we need to put resources into it.
Thank you for your time. I look forward to voting for your confirmation, and I'm going to stop here because I do not want to make Tom Cotton mad at me.
So the remaining senators for 5 minutes each. Senators Cotton, Ossoff, Hawley, and now Senator Whitehouse is going to make a return. Senator Cotton?
Judge, I want to return to where we stopped this morning, the question of racial equality, specifically race discrimination in higher education. Last year, the Department of Justice sued Yale University for discriminating against students on the basis of race. Based on Yale's own data, if you look at one of its top academic categories, when you control for academic achievement, the admission rates by racial category were as follows. Asian Americans, 6%, white applicants, 8%, Hispanics, 21%, African Americans, 49%. Do you think that evidence suggests discrimination based on race in Yale's admissions process?
So again, my best recollection is that between my nomination and now, the department has made a decision about that.
The case was voluntarily dismissed on February 3rd. It's no longer a pending case.
So my recollection is correct. So these kind of cases obviously depend on application of the Supreme Court's opinion in the Gritter case and the Fisher case. And they require a lot of factual development and examination of the facts. These cases do not only depend on disparate statistics, but on all the factors the Supreme Court instructed the lower courts and the government as to what kinds of affirmative action in higher education are permissible and which ones aren't. So I honestly can't draw any conclusions without knowing the facts of the case.
So some of that Supreme Court case law about racial discrimination in higher education says that race can only be used as a plus factor. It can't be decisive in practice. It can't be a defining feature. It can't be the predominant factor. When Asian American kids are 8 times less likely to be admitted in the same band of academic achievement, you don't think that at least suggests a facial case of racial discrimination?
Well, I think that's the question that you look at for the underlying facts to know. I don't remember exactly the words of the Supreme Court opinions, but they seem pretty much exactly, what you just said. You can't have a rigid quota. You can't have a fixed. This was the consequence of the Gratz case, which was the companion case to Gritter. Gritter was the University of Michigan Law School. Gratz was University of Michigan as a university. With respect to Gritter, the court said it was a holistic approach and was permissible. With respect to Gratz, it said it was a fixed ratio or a fixed number and not permissible. But those are things you find out by discovery in the case and examination of what the actual practices of the university were, and I have no idea what they were.
Judge, did anyone in the Biden administration consult with you about the decision to drop the lawsuit against Yale University?
No, I have assiduously kept out of those. It's not appropriate for me to be examining anything like that unless you confirm me.
Will the Department of Justice, under your leadership, pursue cases of obvious racial discrimination in higher education?
Well, if you put it that way, the answer is, of course, yes. Obvious.
Well, I think this presents an obvious case of discrimination against Asian Americans. I suspect some Asian American parents and their kids are a little disappointed in those answers, Judge. I want to turn to the...
I just want to say I'm only giving the answer to what the Supreme Court said the law was. I can't do any better than that.
Eight times less likely to be admitted?
My answer was you have to look at the facts inside.
Okay, I want to turn to another very important topic, which is the rising rates of violent crime in the country. According to the FBI's crime statistics, only 45% of violent crimes in this country result in an arrest. Would it be better or worse if 100% of violent crimes in this country resulted in arrest and prosecution instead of just 45%?
Would be better if Congress gave the department enough money to arrest every single person. I assume you're talking both about state crimes and federal crimes.
That's according, yes, to Department of Justice, FBI crime statistics. Only
so those
45%.
are almost all, or a large percentage, are talking about local crime. So
do you
yes,
think the department today solves too many crimes or prosecutes too many criminals?
The Justice Department?
Yes.
I think it may bring charges in areas which are not a good allocation of its resources, but I don't think it has sufficient resources to, and probably never will, to pursue every crime. That seems impossible.
One final point, Judge, I just want to get on the record. We spoke about this last week in our telephone call about the importance of state and local law enforcement to work together in a collaborative and cooperative fashion with the Department of Justice, both its local U.S. attorneys and the law enforcement agencies that you oversee. I was glad to know that you agree with me those partnerships are vital to reduce crime and keep our community safe. I just wanted to give you the chance to put that on the record today.
Yes, absolutely. My experience in Oklahoma City was close cooperation with the DA's office, the local police there, and with the governor and with the state police. I think these joint task forces are an exceedingly good idea. They're a force multiplier. So I'm completely on board with this. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Judge.
Senator Ossoff?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hi again, Judge Garland. I want to return to the question of the department's authorities and mission to defend voting rights. And note that Sunday would have been Congressman John Lewis's 81st birthday. And as you know, he committed his life and indeed nearly lost his life in the struggle for voting rights. But as we speak, Georgia's state legislature is considering legislation that would make it harder for Georgians to vote. For example, to end Sunday early voting, which is used heavily by black and working class voters, to cut the window during which voters can participate via absentee ballot, which would make it harder for seniors to vote. And I'm not asking you to comment on these specific bills, but what I'm hoping you can provide is an assurance that the Department of Justice will diligently and fully enforce constitutional and statutory guarantees of the rights to vote.
I give you my complete assurance. Yes, Senator.
Thank you so much. I'd also like to discuss with you resources available for public defenders' offices around the country. And a visit to a municipal court in any major American city will reveal that a steady stream of low-income defendants lacking the resources to hire their own attorneys are often represented by overworked and under-resourced public defenders, which contributes to class and race bias in the justice system, and in my view is an affront to the constitutional guarantee of due process as well as of equal protection. So will you work with my office and this committee to determine whether grant programs which may already exist at the department to support local public defenders' offices or which may need to be created can be considered in legislation that this committee and the Senate may consider?
I will, Senator. There's no equal justice in the United States unless everybody has equal access to justice. My own experience, our federal public defender's office is terrific. Needs resources. The federal public defenders across the country, I've tried my best when I was in an administrative position to provide as many resources as possible. The same for our lawyers who volunteer under the Criminal Justice Act. The difference between having an excellent lawyer and not can make all the difference in the world. And I think we should give all the resources that we can. And with respect to the local courts and local public defenders, would have to be through grant programs. But of course, to the extent Congress is willing, I'm strongly in favor.
Well, I appreciate that answer, and I look forward to working with you, I hope, and the chairman and ranking member on those grant programs. And finally, I want to return to the discussion that we had earlier about pattern or practice investigations. And I just want to urge you that if you are confirmed and as you take this office, and there will be so many demands on your time and your attention and important missions for the department to fight violent crime and to defend our national security, that you personally exercise leadership within the department to ensure that the Civil Rights Division's mission is elevated and emphasized, and that you come to this committee to seek and secure any resources that you need to make that real. And just to illustrate why I believe that's so important, the South Fulton Jail in my home state of Georgia has been known to the public for years to have appalling conditions for incarcerated people. And actually, in the last month, a federal court ordered changes to practices within the jail. But it was after years of litigation. The U.S. Attorney's Office did file a brief in the case, but the litigation was brought by independent nonprofit plaintiffs. Years it took for changes to be ordered by a federal court. I'm going to read you a quote from the plaintiff's brief to illustrate the conditions in this jail. and I want to warn the public viewing this on television that the material is graphic. Quote, "The cells were covered in bodily fluids, rust, and mold. In these conditions, the inmates deteriorated, leaving them incoherent, screaming unintelligibly, laying catatonic, banging their heads against walls, and repeatedly attempting suicide. This refers to the solitary confinement of women with severe psychiatric disorders in the South Fulton Jail in Georgia. And these conditions are not unique to this facility. So I want to urge you and ask you one more time, please, respectfully, Judge Garland, your commitment to elevate this mission within the department and to work to secure the human rights of incarcerated people and the American public with all of the power you'll have in this position.
Well, you have my commitment. The Civil Rights Division has responsibilities and some authorities in these areas, and so is quite capable of pursuing these kinds of cases. I took to heart what the chairman said with respect to the role that Robert Kennedy played when he was the Attorney General. And I regard my responsibilities with respect to the Civil Rights Division as at the top of my major priorities lists. So you have my commitment to do everything I can in this area.
Thank you. And just with the chairman's indulgence, Judge, will you commit to reviewing any materials that are sent to you by Congress or by entities such as the NAACP or the Southern Center for Human Rights where it pertains to conditions of incarceration?
So, so that I have some time to be able to read everything that I need to read. If it's all right with you, I'll commit to being sure that the head of the Civil Rights Division and the Associate Attorney General, Ms. Clark and Ms. Gupta, who are directly responsible, do that and then brief me about it. I will, to the extent possible, read them myself, but I've already committed to reading a 400-page document, and there are only so many hours in my day.
Understand the department's conditions, what I'm looking for. So thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Judge Garland, I'd like to talk a little bit more about the law enforcement challenges at the border, which I know a number of other members have brought up with you. Just a fundamental question. Do you believe that illegal entry at America's border should remain a crime?
Well, I haven't thought about that question. I just haven't thought about that question. I think you know, the president has made clear that we are a country of with the borders and with a concern about national security. I don't know of a proposal to decriminalize but still make it unlawful to enter. I just don't know the answer to that question. I haven't thought about it.
Will you continue to prosecute unlawful border crossings?
Well, this is again a question of allocation of resources. We will, the department will prevent unlawful crossing. I don't know. I have to admit, I just don't know exactly what the conditions are and how this is done. I think if I don't know what the current program even is with respect to this. If there, so I assume that the answer would be yes, but I don't know what the issues surrounding it are.
Let me ask you about the guidelines on asylum eligibility, the issued as part of the Executive Office of Immigration Review. Your predecessors have issued quite a number of guidelines about asylum eligibility. Several senators, Senator Hirono, I think Senator Cornyn, talked about the very significant backlog that we have currently in asylum cases. Will you continue to use, keep in force the current guidelines on asylum eligibility, or do you anticipate changing them?
Again, given my current professional occupation, I've had no experience whatsoever with the guidelines, so I can't give you a direct answer to that question. Asylum is part of American law, and the Justice Department and the State Department have an obligation to apply that law. I don't know what the guidelines are that you're talking about, and I don't know even about the rescissions of guidelines that you're talking about.
Will you, if confirmed, I'm sure that you'll be reviewing this and considering these questions. Will you pledge to keep us fully posted as you do so?
Yeah, if there's a change in the government policy, if I'm confirmed, of course, there will be a public change because you can't apply those kind of guidelines without making them public.
Let me turn to the subject of antitrust. I heard your answer to Senator Blackburn about the ongoing Google antitrust prosecution. I believe your answer was you did not anticipate any changes in that ongoing prosecution, that the case would go forward. Did I hear you correctly? Is that right?
I don't want to talk about a pending case because it is, after all, a pending case, and that's just what a judge can't talk about. But as is true with most of our investigations, I will, when I get in, if I'm confirmed, I will examine them. But I don't have any reason to think that I would stop that kind of investigation.
Recently, various news outlets have reported that Susan Davies is being considered to lead the DOJ antitrust division. Susan Davies, of course, has defended Facebook from federal antitrust laws. Facebook has been another target of antitrust scrutiny. Do you think it's appropriate to have someone who is a defender of these massive corporations leading the antitrust division?
Well, let me say a number of things in response to this. First of all, the department has recusal rules which prevents somebody who had a role from taking a role in a case like that. Susan Davies is a fantastic lawyer, a woman of enormous integrity, and I have every confidence that were she in that division, she would proceed as completely appropriate. But it turns out that the press reports are completely incorrect. So
she's not under consideration.
No, not that I know of. No.
Oh, and is not going to be, to the best of your knowledge. I assume it would be your decision.
I don't think either she or I have aspirations for her to be in the antitrust division. So I'm not exactly sure where this came from, but she is a woman of remarkable ability who has helped me in my previous role. And I would be very eager to rely on her good judgment and a woman of strong ethical judgment. So if she were in a position, any position anywhere in the department, she would know when to recuse or not. But this particular issue, she's not, as far as I know, she's not going to be in the antitrust division, not because she wanted to be or I wanted her to be in there and because somebody said she couldn't.
Good. Well, I think that's news, I think, and welcome news. And I just want to register my own point of view here, which is I think that the recusal or not, the message it would send, the Google case is perhaps the most significant antitrust case the department has undertaken since Microsoft. Easily, maybe more significant than that, because Google, frankly, is significantly more powerful than Microsoft was. The message it would send to have a lawyer defending these massive companies and the antitrust division.
I don't know who is sending this message or why this message was being sent, but there is no. I don't have any intention of this, but I am confident that had this been the case, this would not be a problem. Unfortunately or fortunately, a lot of the best antitrust lawyers in the country have some involvement, one way or another, in some part of high tech, and we can't exclude every single good lawyer from being able to be in the division. But that's not an issue. Nothing you need to be concerned about.
Thank you, Judge. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Judge Garland, I want to go back to the topic of protecting the Department of Justice from political influence and being weaponized politically. A number of Senate Democrats at this hearing have used the opportunity to cast aspersions to the job Bill Barr did as Attorney General. I think those aspersions are false. I think he showed enormous courage in fighting to defend the rule of law. But Bill Barr, when explicitly asked about whether he would terminate Robert Mueller at his confirmation hearing, the same situation you find yourself, he said he would not terminate him absent, quote, good cause. Are you willing to meet the same standard of integrity that Bill Barr demonstrated? And will you make that same commitment to this committee that you will not terminate Mr. Durham absent good cause?
Yeah. What I've said to committee and is that I need to get information about this investigation, which I do not have here. I understand that a decision has been made to keep him in place, and I have absolutely no reason to doubt that that was the right decision and that he should be kept in place. But I can't go any further without learning the facts of the investigation and what the status is.
So, Judge Garland, with all due respect, and I recognize you've been a judge for 23, 24 years, judicial nominees sit in that chair and decline to answer just about every question senators pose them, as saying, well, as a judge, I can't commit how I would rule on any given case, and that's appropriate. You're not nominated to be a judge in this position. You are nominated to an executive position, and you're a constitutional scholar. You understand fully well the difference between attorney general versus an Article III judge. Bill Barr didn't know the details of the Mueller investigation at the time, but he knew that Bob Mueller was investigating President Trump, that it was highly politically sensitive. And so to show his integrity and commitment to being nonpartisan, he said he wouldn't terminate Mueller absent good cause. You have the opportunity to do the same thing. The investigation into Durham is highly political. It potentially implicates Joe Biden and Barack Obama. And I just want to be clear, you're refusing to give that same commitment. You want to keep the options open to terminate the investigation.
Look, I'm not refusing to give that commitment because I am a judge. I'm telling you what I think an attorney general ought to do, which is to look at the facts before making a decision. I'm also telling you that I will never make a decision in the department based on politics or on partisanship. So whatever decision I were to make, it would not be based on that. And all I can ask you to do is trust me based on a record of my 24 years as a judge, my entire career before that as a prosecutor, and my life before that. That's my record of integrity, and that's what you have before you.
So a similar line of questions that you were asked concerned the Google antitrust investigation. And Google, big tech as a whole, contributed over $15 million to the Joe Biden campaign. They're enormously important Democratic donors. There will be enormous political pressure to abandon that case against Google. Can you give this committee assurances that you can stand up to that political pressure just because Democratic fundraisers want to be lenient on Google, that the Department of Justice will not give in to that pressure?
So, Senator Cruz, I'm old enough to remember when there was a political effort to end a case in the antitrust case in the Justice Department against ITT, which gives you an idea of how old this is, that there is no ITT anymore, the International Telephone and Telegraph Company. This, if I'm not wrong, this was one of the paragraphs in the indictment, the proposed indictment, impeachment of President Nixon, I think, but it was around the same time. And it had to do with a partisan effort to influence the Justice Department and the Antitrust Division. I grew up knowing that this is not something that is permissible for the Justice Department to do. And my whole life has been in looking at Ed Levy and Watergate, post-Watergate attorneys general who stood up to that kind of stuff. And I can assure you that I don't care what kind of donor talks to me about what of anything. I don't expect to talk to any donors. I have no conflicts. I don't own any Google stock, and I will do whatever is the right thing, and I don't own any stock, or I won't once if I'm...
Let me ask two very quick questions because my time is expiring.
Yeah.
Number one, you voted to rehear the Heller case, or actually the Parker case, en banc.
I did.
I argued the Parker case in the D.C. Circuit. As Attorney General, will the Department of Justice argue for the Supreme Court to overturn Heller versus District of Columbia?
Look, the department, makes all kinds of judgments like that. I can't promise, but I find it hard to believe that the department could think that there was any possibility of overturning the Heller case.
Okay, and then the final one, with the chairman's indulgence, because I'm at the end of my time.
Yeah.
9 senators wrote a letter to Chairman Durbin asking this committee to investigate Governor Andrew Cuomo's policies concerning COVID and sending COVID-positive individuals into nursing homes. A senior aide of his admitted to a cover-up to hide information from the Department of Justice. You've committed to a number of investigations here at this hearing today. Will you commit to investigating the extent to which the government of New York broke laws or covered up their policies concerning COVID-positive patients in nursing homes?
With all of these investigations, the Justice Department is open to evidence of fraud, false statements, violations of the law. They normally begin in the appropriate way in the relevant U.S. Attorney's Office. And that is the way that something like this, without commenting on this in particular, because I don't know the facts.
But in this instance, the acting U.S. attorney is the mother-in-law of the senior official in the Cuomo administration that admitted to the cover-up. Will you at least commit to not having the investigation done by a person with a conflict of interest?
Of course. I don't know any of the facts, but I can guarantee you that somebody with a conflict of interest will not be the person running an investigation of any kind.
Thank you.
Since it has appeared, reappeared, and then appeared again, this question about the Durham special counsel. For the record, the President of the United States and the White House, when they reported their policy on the future of U.S. attorneys, made two exceptions, if I remember correctly. One was for the Delaware U.S. attorney, and the second one was in this situation with Durham. The administration is clearly committed publicly to allowing Durham to complete his investigation. I don't know that any additional comments are needed beyond that, though you've been asked many, many times that question. In terms of Attorney General Barr, we do remember that he wrote an unsolicited memo questioning the legitimacy of the Mueller investigation before he was under active consideration for the office of the Attorney General. I don't know why the other side keeps returning to this, but I think your position is consistent with the White House position and is what we would expect of any Attorney General when it comes to making an assessment after they learn the facts. Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you, Chairman. And I may be am I the final questioner? Could be. So I may be all that stands between you and relief from these proceedings, Your Honor. I would summarize our earlier conversation as you telling us that when we ask you questions, or the department or the FBI questions, we're entitled to an answer. And if the answer is no, we can't tell you that, we're entitled to an explanation as to why you think that. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right, Senator.
Good. I touched on the problem of executive privilege because the Department of Justice has a role as kind of an arbiter for the whole administration of executive privilege determinations. We had documents sent in here blank that had the phrase constitutional privilege stamped on them. No articulation of what constitutional privilege it was. We have had witnesses claim to assert executive privilege, but the administration never backed them up by actually asserting the privilege, so there was never actually a test of the proposition. But our chairman wouldn't force an answer, so we were stuck. And I urge you to, maybe we should even have a hearing on it, think through what executive privilege ought to look like, what the process for declaring it ought to look like, and try to get that cleared up so that in this committee, we're no longer being treated the way we were in the last administration. You mentioned that false statements were a way that cases kind of traditionally came in, went to the U.S. attorney first, worked their way up. There's one sort of strange anomaly, which is false statements to the IRS. The administration before this one took the view that a false statement to the IRS was something that they wouldn't look at unless it had been referred by the IRS. Mm-hmm. So I get the policy of not getting into criminal investigations of tax law without the IRS saying, hey, we'd like you to prosecute this. We are the tax law experts, and we really, we have some equities here, and we either want you or don't want you to proceed criminally in this matter. I get that. When it's a plain vanilla false statement, I did that as U.S. attorney. You did those cases. Anybody who served as a U.S. attorney has done those cases. I'd urge you to reconsider a policy of deferring to the IRS before proceeding on a simple false statement case. Obviously, it'll be fact specific, but I flagged that for you. And the last point I'd like to make is that it seems to me, and I'll ask you to agree or disagree with the statement, it seems to me that failing to proceed where an investigation or a prosecution is warranted, and doing so on political grounds, is just as bad as proceeding with an investigation or prosecution on political grounds. Would you agree that that's a
Yes.
correct proposition?
Of course, absolutely.
Last of all, we all need something to believe in, I think. People who worked in the department very much believe in the Department of Justice. They believe in the merits and the norms and the values and the traditions of their service and of the department. People across this country need to believe. And there was a lot that happened in the last administration to cause doubt about whether the Department of Justice met that standard. They were worthy of the public's trust and belief. Let me ask you as your closing comments to respond to how you view the importance of the public's trust and belief in the Department of Justice and your commitment to salvaging if necessary, restoring as needed, and upholding those ideals.
Yeah, look, I couldn't agree with you more. It's not just that the department has to do justice, that it has to appear to do justice, and that the people of the United States has to believe that it does justice. Otherwise, people lose their faith in the rule of law. They take the law into their own hands. They become cynical about law enforcement, about public servants. I would like, for the time that I'm in the Justice Department, to turn down the volume on the way in which people view the department, that the Justice Department not be the center of partisan disagreement, that we return to the days when the department does its law enforcement and criminal justice policy, and that this is viewed in a bipartisan way, which for a long time in the history of the department, that's the way it was. I know that these are divisive times. I'm not naive, but I would like to do everything I can to have people believe that that's what we're doing. People will disagree. People on the left side, the right side, the Democratic side, the Republican side will disagree with things that I do. And that has happened as a judge. The only thing I can hope is that people will understand that I am doing what I do because I believe it's the right thing and not out of some improper motive. That's the best I can ask. And if you confirm me, and if at the end of my time people still believe that, I will consider that a singular accomplishment.
Godspeed to you, sir.
Judge Garland, I'm going to say a few words about what the committee's going to do tomorrow in pursuit of your nomination, and then a few closing comments. Tomorrow, the second day of the hearing begins at 10 a.m. We'll hear from a panel of outside witnesses. Reminder that questions for record from the senators on the committee must be submitted by 5 p.m. on Wednesday, February 24th. I hope people will show good faith and common sense in the number of questions that they submit, because you have been open now for 2 full rounds to ask whatever people have had on their minds. Let me say a few words in closing. My appreciation of your background is a little different than some. I know one of your earliest inspirations was a man named Abner Mikva, who proceeded to serve with distinction all 3 levels of government in the federal branch, as well as his initial service in the Illinois House of Representatives. One of his closest friends and allies and colleagues over the years was a man named Paul Simon, who picked me up and dusted me off a few times when I lost elections and said, "You'll get him next time." He was right. I eventually did, but it took a while. I knew Abner Mikva personally and through his relationship with my mentor, Paul Simon. They represented the very best in public service. Integrity, honesty, hard work, all of the above, time and again. We are lucky to be heirs of that legacy, and I think that has inspired both of us in our different pursuits of public service. When President-elect Biden told me that you were under consideration for this job, I thought instantly, this is the right person. At this moment in history, this is the right person to put in as Attorney General. The Department of Justice needs to have its morale restored. It needs to have its reputation restored. It needs leadership that is honest and we can respect from every corner of this country. You are that person. Your testimony today is evidence of that. I want to thank your family in particular. I don't know that they have, you mentioned it, but it's well worth repeating. Lynn, thank you for being here. Rebecca and her husband, Alexander, that would be Becky and Zan. And Jessica, Jesse, thank you for being here today in support of an extraordinary person who is ready to serve again and is being called by the president to be there at a moment in history when he's needed the most. This president has put faith in you, Judge Garland. We will do the same. Thank you again. I look forward to your swift confirmation. And with that, the hearing stands adjourned until 10 tomorrow.